Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to my channel. My name is Ogbanje Joseph. Please subscribe to this channel, share, like, as well as drop a comment on the comment section. Our lecture today is um is titled Herders Farmers Clashes. Herders Farmers Clashes in Nigeria. Herders Farmers Clashes in Nigeria. Now, the herders farmers conflict in Nigeria usually involve disputes over land and or cattle between herders in particular, that's the Fulani, of course, Hausa Fulani, and of course the farmers. Now, since the beginning of the Fourth Republic in 1999, the farmer-herder conflict has killed thousands of people and displaced tens of thousands more. Now, it followed a trend, okay, in the increase of people, okay, in the increase of, the farmer-herder conflict throughout much of the Western Sahel, you know, due to an expansion, okay, of agriculturist population, cultivated land at the expense of pasture lands, you know, um, deteriorating environmental conditions, desertification and soil degradation, breakdown in traditional conflict resolution mechanism of land and water dispute, and then the proliferation of small arms and crime in rural areas. Now, majority of farmer-herder clashes have occurred between Muslim Fulani herdsmen and and um, of course Christian peasants, Christian peasants, that is agricultural peasants, exacerbating you know, ethno-religious hostilities. Now, according to the Global Terrorism Index, okay, Fulani militias were the fourth deadliest terrorist groups in 2014, using machine guns and attacks on villages to assault and intimidate farmers. After killing around 80 people in total from between 2010 to 2013, they also killed 1,229 in 2014 alone. Now, most of these deaths occurred in Nigeria's Middle Belt, in particular, okay, in the states of Benue, Kaduna, Nasarawa, Plateau, and Taraba. The year 2016 saw further incidents of, of killings in Agatu, Benue State, and Nimbo in um, Enugu State. Now, what are the causes? What are the causes of these farmer herders clashes? Number one is drought and desertification. Drought and desertification. Of course, in the Sahel region, that is the northern part of the country, of course, there is an encroachment of desertification actually encroaching into most of the northern states of the country. And so because of that, the the herders actually, in order for them to graze their cattle, have decided to actually move southward. And as they do that, of course, they encroach on people's lands, of farmlands, and that causes a lot of crisis, upheavals between the herders and the farmers. That's number one. Number two, changes in pastoralism and farming practices. Of course, there is a change in pastoralism. How this how these cattle are actually grazed, is actually another major problem. Of course, in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s, as well as 80s, between 50s to 70s, there were cattle ranch or ranches. Okay, there are pastoral, there are cattle lines. There are pasture lines. Okay, that the cattle actually grazed. But today, it is not like that because what has happened because of the encroachment of human beings, and of course buildings into most of these, grazing lines. What has happened today is that the herders now take their cattle, from one place to another for grazing. Okay, so number three, loss of grazing reserves. Now, don't forget that in the 1960s, we had more than about 415 grazing routes. Okay, now, of course, it increased. Okay, it increased to 114, that were formally documented. But all of them have actually been lost today because of overpopulation. Okay, so those are just the major things. Number four, we have rural banditry and cattle rustling. Because of this rural banditry and cattle rustling, now these herders actually move their cattle from danger zones to areas where their cattle are secured. Okay, number five, escalating conflict across northern Nigeria. Of course, because of the tension and conflict in northern Nigeria, the herders, find solace in other parts of Nigeria, and that is the reason for the movement in droves, from the northern part. The next one is erosion of traditional mechanism of conflict resolution. Now, instead of actually exploring the traditional mechanism of conflict resolution, these herders and farmers, eventually, will resort to, self-help, and this self-help eventually actually lead to conflict and further conflict. Now let us look at the impact. What is the impact of these farmer herder clashes on the country? Number one is internal displacement. When people have been killed, when people, when people's lives and properties have been destroyed, what they eventually resort to is to take to their heels and take solace in places where there is security. So, it brings about the upsurge of what? Of internal displacement or internally displaced people's camps, in several parts of the country. That's number one impact of these farmer header clashes. Number two, economic loss. Now according to reports, in 2015, the federal government alone actually lost about 13.7 billion dollars in revenue, and then like four states, lost about 47% of their IGR. you know of course, the Benue governor actually said this thing has actually cost them about 65 billion naira in 2016. So, of course, it has impact on the economy of the country in general and the affected states in particular. Number three, other armed groups, hide under the cover of the perpetrators, to perpetrate violence and crime. So other criminal gangs actually hide under, the cover of this conflict to perpetrate a lot of crimes. Then number four, it increases interfaith and interethnic conflict, causing a crack to Nigeria's unity. Now, what are the solutions? What are the proposed solutions to this farmer herder conflict? Number one is improvement of security for the herders and farmers. It is very important that police, joint military force, or joint task force is actually deployed to flashpoints to ensure that these farmers and herders are properly secured. Okay, that's number one. Number two, strengthening of police capacity to curb rustling and banditry. Of course, the Nigeria police force must be empowered and their capacity must be boosted to ensure that they are able to actually, curb rustling and banditry in the country. Number three, improvement of livestock tracking. There is need for there is need for all the heads in this country to be for a census to be taken of all the heads in this country, and there is need for them to be tracked properly. Okay, number four, prevention of attacks on farming communities. The farming communities that are scattered all over Nigeria should be properly secured in order for attacks, in order for them to actually be protected and secured against any, impromptu attacks. Okay, then the next one is support community-based conflict resolution. That's the support for community-based conflict resolution. There is need for a support for community-based conflict, resolution. Then the next one is the establishment of grazing reserves and encouragement of ranching. There is need for ruga to be established in several parts of the country, particularly where you have several headers, domiciled. Okay, then the last but not the least is combating desertification. There is need for planting of trees and combating desertification. Enlightenment campaigns should actually be embarked upon so that people who actually indiscriminately fell tree will actually be discouraged from doing so, in order for desertification not to encroach very fast, particularly in the Sahel region of the country. Thank you very much.